All right, we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Greenlight Bookstore. We're super excited to host tonight's event with Larissa Pham, presenting her book, Pop Song, newly out in paperback. I believe the hardcover launch was virtual.
Yeah.
So we're really excited to celebrate in person. She will be talking with Sally Wen Mao, so you're in for an excellent conversation. Before I turn things over to them, just a few housekeeping reminders. Please turn off or silence your cell phones if you haven't already. Please keep your masks on for the entirety of the time you're in the store. And most importantly, signed books, signed copies of Pop Song are available at the register, and Larissa may personalize them if you ask at the end of the evening. This event is being recorded and will be available on the Greenlight Bookstore YouTube channel. And we close our doors at 9 p.m. tonight, so after the event you're free to mingle and to shop, but we do ask that everybody mind our closing time. Our interviewer for this evening is Sally Wen Mao. Sally is the author of Oculus, a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Poetry. Her first book, Mad Honey Symposium, was the winner of the 2012 Kenneth Gensler Award. She was born in Wuhan, China, and raised in the Bay Area, California. Sally will be speaking with her featured author, Larissa Pham. Pham is an artist and writer in Brooklyn. She has taught with Kundiman, the Asian American Writers Workshop from the New School, and she has received support from the Jack Jones Literary Arts and the Bennington Writing Seminars. She is also the author of Fantasia, a novella. Pop Song, tonight's featured book, was a 2021 finalist for the National Books Critics Circle John Leonard Prize. Pham's debut work of nonfiction captures the imagination and refuses to let go. Pop Song is a book about love and about falling in love with a place or a painting or a person, and the joy and terror inherent in the experience of that love. So you're in for something very special. Larissa will be reading from the book, and Sally will join her in conversation, and you'll have the chance to ask questions after that. So please join me in welcoming Sally and Larissa.
Hi. Thanks so much for coming. This is very exciting to me. Having a book come out in the pandemic meant that a lot of my books were virtual. So it's really exciting to be in a room full of people at a bookstore. So I'm going to read from the last chapter in the book, and Sally's actually in this section, which is quite fun. And so I think the only context you need to know in this chapter is that I just got broken up with. I should let these people finish their transaction before I start it. I think we're good. Alright, that's good. Okay. On being alone. After we broke up, I spent 2 days laying on the couch in my living room. My roommates flitted in and out like they were trying not to disturb a corpse. That fall, I'd started temping at a different nonprofit in Manhattan, writing ineffectual blog posts arguing against Kavanaugh's confirmation, and glad-handing press releases about LGBTQ-friendly celebrities. The gig got me out of the house, but my heart wasn't in it, and I was sleepwalking through my days, dressed in the corporate drag I tried so hard to avoid. Your absence bounced around me, sometimes painfully, sometimes startlingly with an air of reproach. How had I let myself get so used to having you in my life? I couldn't bear trudging through the city where we both still lived. I imagined it would have been better if you had moved or I had moved, or melodramatically if you had died or I had died, some physical act that made the new distance between us explicable. I kind of felt like dying. I still loved you a lot. I could feel it running through my entire body like a current, in my sternum, in my wrists. But no matter how I turned it over in my head, the answer was always the same. We had to break up, not for want of care, but because the things we needed from each other didn't line up. I clung, and you spun out. In our early days, I'd been so scared, waiting for the moment that you'd hurt me. Every argument we had limbed by the knowledge of my old ghosts. Had your distance in your own way been your version of a protection spell? Were you the one who had been tensed, waiting for the moment when I'd leave you because you'd always thought I would go? Maybe now it was my turn to be the one to stay, if not in place, then to wait. Then I got an email asking if I wanted to go to China for a week. A luxury brand that I'd done some copywriting for was inviting me to attend a show the creative director had curated at the Youth Museum in Shanghai. There was no catch. There was no work. I'm not a magical thinker, but I found it magic. An escape beckoned at the precise time I couldn't stand to be with the information of my ordinary life. A few days later, itinerary in hand, I was picking up my rush-approved visa at the Chinese consulate, the wind blowing strong across the Hudson, tears stinging in my eyes. Then I was tucked into a business class pod on a 14-hour flight, knocked out on free champagne. And then I was nowhere. And then I was in Shanghai. The president was in town, I was told, which was why the freeways were lined with flowers. The president's presence was also why, I'd later learned, the nightclubs were closed for the entirety of my visit. I was sad to hear it. I was hoping to visit a club my friends back home had told me about. The black car that I was in wove through overpasses and sped along an expansive elevated road, which shot past wide, empty swaths of land, and as we grew closer to the city center, residential neighborhoods. Approaching the financial center of the city, the buildings gleamed, rising in front of the river. Shanghai is a strange, sprawling city, its colonial history evident in its architecture. In 1842, after the First Opium War, a treaty imposed by the British designated Shanghai as a strategic port and opened up the city to Western settlement. A number of sovereign international territories within the city were carved out: the British concession in 1845, the American concession in 1848, and in 1849, the French concession, which still exists in name as a historic, trendy neighborhood. Colonial, Western-style architecture sprang up along the Bund, the riverfront walkway that now looks onto the Oriental Pearl TV tower. The changing landscape passed by me in snatches. I caught sight of the Pearl Tower, magenta pink and crystalline, as if covered in gemstone pave. And then we crossed into the west side of Shanghai, passing the colonial buildings of the Bund and moving deeper into the city toward Jing'an. Before long, everything started to look like a mall, twinkling with neon lights. I was deposited, bleary-eyed, at a luxury hotel, a huge glass and steel building whose illuminated tower was shrouded in pinkish fog. High above my head, the name of the hotel, Shangri-La, glowed in yellow calligraphed letters. Inside, the lobby was replete with shimmering crystal and flower arrangements, and on the walls were large, brushy, carefully inoffensive abstract paintings. Because of the last-minute way our flights had been arranged, I was the first to arrive, before the fashion bloggers and the brand reps who had also been invited on the trip. The front desk staff greeted me warmly, scanned my passport, and shepherded me into an elevator to the 31st floor where I was met with the biggest hotel room I'd ever seen in my life. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the city, where I could make out the tiny figures of people on the sidewalks far below, and above them a thicket of high-rises, and in the space between two buildings, on a low rooftop, an empty tennis court. The hotel bed was wider than it was long, an expansive white linen. It seemed criminal to allot it to just one person. Not that it mattered, I thought glumly, because I was alone. The last time I'd been in a nice hotel room had been with you in Mexico. Pondering this fact left me profoundly depressed and then irked. Had I really come all this way to mope? I threw myself on the bed, considering. To my right was a bathroom which had a huge mirror that stretched the full length of the wall. Far to the left were windows. Mustering up my resolve, I dumped out all my fancy clothes and hung them in the closet, then upended my backpack, connecting my laptop to the hotel Wi-Fi. I'm gonna skip this part, I'm just talking about what's in my bag. My friend Sally, a poet, happened to be in the middle of a 6-month residency sponsored by a different, sporty accessory brand, and was staying at a hotel close to the Bund. Over WeChat, we made plans to get dinner, and within the hour, she was downstairs waiting to take me to Hot Pot. I threw on an outfit and scrambled down to the lobby. It cheered me up instantly to see Sally, and I was comforted by her gregariousness as she slipped effortlessly into the role of host, leading us to a hot pot place that was tucked away in a mall that seemed identical to all the other malls surrounding my hotel. As we wound through the bright lights, I felt my mood lift. This was what I knew, where I felt most free, letting myself float along in an unfamiliar city. When I saw a sign that said, in English, simply, "Time is passing," next to what looked like the exit arrow, I laughed aloud, surprising myself, and took a picture. Sally asked why I was in Shanghai. I told her about the show that the brand had sent me to see. I wasn't entirely sure what they were expecting me to do here. I wasn't covering the show as a critic, but I couldn't imagine how the brand benefited from having me in the city. We talked about Sally's residency, about the poems she was writing, and the friends of mine who had visited not too long ago. They'd also met up for hot pot and karaoke. And the sudden flush of happiness I felt, basking in familiar human connection, I didn't want to talk about the breakup as much as I felt it acutely. I felt that if I did, in this new place, I'd come to let it define me. We ordered an astonishing amount of food that night. 2 kinds of broth, spicy mala and savory pork, sumptuous red curls of sliced lamb and marbled beef, a pile of different kinds of mushrooms and another pile of pea shoots, thin-veined, pale green Chinese cabbage, and translucent snow white slices of winter melon, which went rich and soft in the piping hot pork bone broth. Because there was a special on them, Sally and I had ordered frogs too, and they arrived whole on a bed of lettuce, their legs politely crossed. We dunked them in the mala hot pepper broth, which made my mouth go shockingly numb, and took a picture of them. Froggies in a hot tub, Sally said, taking a video for Instagram. Later that night, alone in my room, my emotions fell again. I looked out at the city, the yellow light of my surroundings reflected in the window, so that my own ghostly reflection appeared superimposed over the city skyline. I felt deflated, even more so after the buoyancy of the evening. It seemed incredible to me that I could have come so far, from Portland to New Haven to Providence and New York, to Taos to Condessa and Crown Heights and my painting studio in Sunset Park. And yet, at the end of this, I remained doing all the same ordinary things. I still felt like me. I wanted to be anyone but. This was the problem, I thought, of having a body. I couldn't leave mine. I stripped in the enormous bathroom. I tried to take just one good nude. Lips, nipples, sliver of teeth, arranging myself to the slow song of the body I knew everyone knew. But none of my usual angles seemed to work, and my sadness peeked through every photo. Abandoning the effort, I crawled into bed, turned on my VPN, and fell asleep scrolling through Instagram, hoping each photo carried a secret message just for me. But none of them did, and none of them would. They were all just pictures of New York. By the time my eyes had closed and stayed closed, the sun had already risen, hanging in the pink sky like a halved cling peach. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Oh my gosh, I loved hearing you read that this time. I guess, I was going to end with a question about that essay, but since you just read a piece for us, I'm going to start with it.
Yeah.
So, wasn't that beautiful? Just thinking about
the food.
Yes, it's like the gorgeous detail with which you describe the food, and that hot pot with the froggies. So this is kind of a really drawn out question, and I like to write my questions down. But you kind of admitted in this essay, the first thing that I kind of noticed about it was that you were in the moment, you were in the present moment with me, and you wanted to keep yourself in the present moment, so you didn't mention to me that you were suffering. I had no idea while we were, eating a hot pot, but at the time we didn't really know each other that well, so maybe it was like a propriety thing, and I was just thinking as I was reading the essay, I identified so much with, just being heartbroken, but then also being in a new city and being alone. Like I've definitely traveled alone a lot, and it feels very bittersweet sometimes, right? Because you're just in this moment where you wish you could share it with somebody, and I also want to share that years later we had another meal together. Like really recently, more like a few months ago, we had another meal together, and this time I think you told me, you were like, oh, I don't want to hide anything. I'm going, this is what I'm going through, right? And so in this essay, you mentioned how Louise Bourgeois made you feel, especially when you were just wandering around that museum, and you specifically mentioned how she asked us to feel violently, and and to go to, quote, the very end of the hallway of the self. And I'm so interested in this phrase, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that phrase, like, what do you know, how would you define the very end of the hallway of the self, and, you know, what is the value of going there?
Yeah. Ooh, what a big question. So the context for this is that I was in China with Gucci, and they were like, you've done some copywriting for us, like, we're gonna send you on this vacation basically, but you have to like go to these weird art shows and these weird art fairs that like we're asking you to go to. So like art fairs are really depressing. Like the art, like I don't know, like the Armory or like Frieze or like all of those, like it's just like white walls. It's very soulless. It's very like sterile. Like the light's too bright. You're sweaty. You don't have anything to eat. And so I was just like in this sort of like realm of capitalism, like of like, you know, like here's what you should buy. Like this is like what you should consume. And I was just like so upset by it and like so like repulsed by it that I was like, I need to see some like real art. Like I need to see some beauty. So I went to this Louise Bourgeois show at this museum called the Youth Museum, which is like corporate in its own way, like it's all money laundering. But I was like really trying to have like a meaningful experience with art. And so that's kind of the context for this question that Sally's asking. But yeah, being in Shanghai was really interesting because I was so profoundly lonely that like it almost like it completely like took my like feet out from under me. Like there was nothing that I could do to make it better. Like it was just like the worst feeling ever. I was just so profoundly alone in this country that I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone on the trip with me. I knew you, Sally, and I like clung to you like a life raft. But I had a lot of time, especially at night, because I was so jet lagged, to consider my feelings. And I think that's where that sense of like going to the end of the hallway of the self is. It's like when you don't have anything left, like when there's no more distractions, when you've literally like run across the world somewhere else to try to have a meaningful experience and you come up with nothing, like you have no choice but to go into your own sadness and go into your own loneliness and your own heartbreak. And then you realize there's an end. Like at the end of my loneliness, there was a door. Is that the line?
Yeah. The line.
Yeah, and like there is a door, and you go through the door, and you're fine. And it'll turn out okay. That's the moral of the story. But it's like I don't know. It's like sometimes you're so afraid of going to the end of your own fear, the end of your own sadness. But like there's an end to it. It's not a bottomless pit. That's how I feel about that, Sally.
Love that. I love the feelings. It's also Cancer season,
Cancer
and as a Pisces, there's so many feelings. So my next question, particular feeling that you even named in one of your essays, but there is so much longing in this book, and I love that. And it's like the longing that's kind of tied to distance, like you were talking about traveling. And wandering, really, like you, like in a way you're more open when you're wandering or when you're far away. And do you believe that longing has redeeming qualities? And if so, what? And also, what makes longing worth it? Because it's so painful, right? But I feel like I've come up with some answers to this question as I was reading your book, which is one of the reasons why I appreciated it so much. But yeah, I'm curious what you think.
Do we think longing has redeeming qualities? Yeah, I think it's actually like a very seductive feeling. I think it is very enticing to be in the space of wanting, of desire, of not being fulfilled, and to do basically everything within your power to not fulfill those things, and to be like, no, I am someone who wants, I am someone who craves, I am someone who desires, and yeah, I think it can actually be like a little addictive as a feeling, like a little bit, like it's like a place that you can kind of like conveniently like slide back into like over and over, and it feels like home, and then like that becomes challenging when like something arises in your life and you're like, oh, like maybe this is something that will make me happy, but you don't know how to handle it. But I think, you know, longing in of itself is a very romantic feeling too, and that I think it is like you are prone to romanticize it as well. But I'm curious what you think of it for you.
Well, I'm a poet. So, like, I don't know, everything is fodder. Everything is fodder no matter how much it tortures you and torments you. And okay, I think that relates to,
Oh, one last thing though.
Yes.
I think wanting also makes you feel like you can always move forward. Because you don't feel like it could be a static place, but at the same time, if you want something, like if you're longing for something, like it's always something to look forward to, so you don't feel like static in that way, even if like paradoxically you're still staying in place.
yeah, that's true. That's also what drives like most plots,
Yeah.
right, in novels. Like that's
Yeah.
what your that's the idea that's like drilled into your head in creative writing class, right? Like, oh, what does this person, this character want?
Yeah.
Like, and if they don't want anything, then there's nothing there. There's static.
Yeah, then they're just chilling. Just fun to-
Yeah, I'm just going all over the map. Who cares about order?
We're just chatting in front of
yeah.
our like, 30 closest friends.
I love that. So, I want to think about maybe since that essay, the essay that names longing is an essay that's like about photography. I think that this is kind of an obsession that we share in our works, in
totally.
in our books, and just like the consideration of like the photograph as an intimate space, but then that it contains both truth and deception in a way, right? And you mentioned it in one of the essays is that, well, you took photographs to, quote, make these over full moments stay. And so I'm really curious about the role of both photography and writing for you and how they function in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, Sally's latest poetry collection is called Oculus, so it's also about the gaze in a really interesting way. Just FYI. Can pick up a copy later. I highly recommend it. So I think I've been thinking about this, and I think like you asking these two questions right next to each other is making me realize something about myself. That's a little scary to admit, but I think I have a lot of trouble with things. I think I have a lot of trouble like accepting and being present in the world as it is, and so writing and photography are two ways that you can kind of like distance yourself from something while still being like very worshipful of the moment. Like I can like maybe not handle like having a good time or being happy or like being present with people that I really care about, but like if I take a picture of it, then I'm like, okay, cool, like I have that, so I can look at it later. I can think about how happy I was, but I don't have to like fully accept like all these big feelings and all this love in my life. I can just kind of like put it to the side. And so I think writing and photography are these two ways that you can intellectualize and distance yourself, and also I think control certain aspects of the present moment in life that might feel daunting. I don't know if I'm 100% agree with that, but I feel like that's kind of where it's coming from. Yeah, it's like it's always like a relationship to the truth, I think, and to memory.
Yeah, there was something really like exhilarating about kind of reading that moment where you were taking a picture in front of the river in Shanghai. You took a picture of like the reflection of the lights of the boat, and I remember that moment. I remember like watching you take a picture of that, and but then being able to like go back and read like your like kind of written interpretation of that image was like really like lovely for me, because you like capturing it with the photo and also capturing it in writing, it's almost like two different vantage points, and I love that. And like today earlier, I was looking for a photo of that day that we had, and then you know, there were a lot of things that I had forgotten. Like I forgot what I was wearing. I forgot like all of these details. But there's something very precise about the way you write too. Like it's very detail oriented.
Because I'm consulting photos, Sally. Like I'm literally like going through my iPhone camera being like, what did I do that day? Like, what were we eating? Like, where did we go? Like, I do a lot of like cross-referencing in my own life. I'm like a historian of like my own life, where like I'll like look things up on Google and I'm like, okay, so this was like actually like a 5-minute walk, so I must have been this far. You know, like things like that. Because otherwise I don't remember. Like my brain is like a sieve. Like it's like everything just like falls out otherwise.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I love that actually, because I do that too. We like there's value in documentation. There's value in not being in the moment.
Yeah, it's a balance.
It's a balance, yeah.
Yeah.
So the next question I wanted to ask you about the relationship between viewing, writing about, and also making art, because in a lot of your essays you reference painting and like your own artistic practice, but then you work so, you know, like soundly at the intersection of all three, like
Soundly. Thank you.
And yeah, I want to hear your insights on all of these hats that you're wearing and how they feed each other.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's some painters in the chat. I feel like nothing has informed my writing practice more than painting itself. I think questions of like thinking about something as like a form, or thinking of something as having formal qualities, or like having a practice, or like being in dialogue with something, or being like the work being in dialogue with itself. Like these are all things that I learned from painting and from like a very particular school of painting, which is like in a studio, like rigorously like critiquing, like being in conversation with like other people. So even though like I'm not a painter now, I feel like it really shapes like the way that I see my writing practice. And I think like what it allows me is that like I get to write in like a kind of fetishistic way about painting in this book, and there are moments where like you could, like I'm like using different color names, for example, and like really enjoying that, really kind of like drawing on a certain kind of vocabulary that is very comfortable but also very precise. I think that's like maybe where that precision comes from. Is like there's so many colors, right? But like you know, poets use a lot of colors, but the other people who use a lot of colors are artists, because artists have like pigments that they use, and like each pigment has a name. Like when you go to a store and buy like tubes of paint, they have names. So I think that's like sort of like that's my way of like honoring this visual practice, is like using that kind of language and drawing upon it. But then looking at art is so different from making it, and I think I'm really interested in criticism as a tool for interpretation. Which is why, like, you know, it was funny, my mom, like, when this book was coming out, she was like, oh, you need to, like, include pictures, and I was like, I don't think we can afford the rights to that, Mom. Like, Catapult is, like, not a very big press, like, I don't think, like, I would have to pay a lot of money for that. And then she was like, well, you should make, like, a website where you, like, link to everything that you're showing so that people, like, can see what's here, and I was like, okay, like, maybe I'll do that. And I really should have done it. But what I did, there's actually no excuse. Again, I think it's a rights thing, like, a lot of images you can't use. But what I did try to do ultimately was every piece that I name in this book, you can Google, you can look it up, and you can find like a high resolution image. Like I didn't want to write about anything that was like so obscure that you couldn't find it. And that's because I did want people to see what I was seeing, and I hope that by talking about like how I felt when I saw something, when I encountered something, you know, someone saw that too, then we could kind of share an experience. Which is one thing that literature can do. Yeah.
So great, and there's so many like beautiful references to artists like Golden and Kusama and Martin, and like I mentioned Louise Bourgeois. And you kind of you just said the word encounter, which is interesting to me. Because you have described with precision the kind of like impact that each of these artists have had on you, like at a particular point in your life. And I was wondering if your relationship to these works ever shift, you know, if what nuances or new angles do you like discover like with time, and also if there were any artists that you wanted to include here but didn't.
Oh man. Yeah, actually I think when I was writing about these artists, there were a couple moments when I was researching their biographies, because there's like a fair amount of biography in this book, and like on Goodreads someone was like, it's a little clunky. You know what, it's fine. This is the way I studied in college. There will be biography in this. But, picture in the chat. But I do think that, you know, I had a really, this is two specific artists. Like the two artists that I devote the most time to in this book are Agnes Martin and Louise Bourgeois. And when I was first thinking about Agnes Martin, like I was like, oh, like, you know, some sort of like woo-woo, like white Canadian lady who like lived in New Mexico, made these like really tranquil paintings, like they're called like friendship and love, like this seems very simple. And then like once I was reading about her life, like she really had like a very challenging like time, and like her mental health was like very unstable, and like the place that she was making this work from was not a place of like tranquility all the time, which is what I assumed. Like I just thought that the work was a metonym for like this mental state, and what I learned is actually like her life was much more complicated and beautiful for its complexity than I thought initially. So then I had to like completely change the way that I wrote about her work because I knew these things about her. And in the same way with Louise Bourgeois, I was kind of like, okay, well, you know, I know she is a sculptor, like I know she makes this like kind of intense bodily works, but again, reading about her life and, you know, what it was like to be a woman sculptor in a time where she was kind of the only one doing the thing that she was doing, but the legacy of her work has extended such that, like, we don't think that that was, like, you know, like a really groundbreaking thing to do, but that is who she was as an artist, and she was also, like, famously difficult, like, very Freudian, like, had, like, really complicated relationship with her family, and, like, with her parents in particular, and then like, you know, like I imagine it's probably a little challenging to be like her child, and all of this made its way into the text like once I started researching. In body work, just one more example, like I write about my changing relationship to Nan Goldin's work because, you know, I had like that sort of like early Tumblr era relationship to like, you know, like, oh, these cool pictures of like people doing drugs in the 80s. And then it's like, yeah, there's like more to her than that though. And like, you know, part of honoring who she is as an artist is like acknowledging that like her work has changed and evolved and her priorities have changed and evolved. And like, it was incumbent upon me writing about her like to try to represent that, and it was like a nice mirror to my own understanding of pain as it evolved over, you know, the last 10 years of my life. Long answer.
Oh,
and I don't know who I would include. I don't know. There's a lot of people that I probably should have included, and I didn't. It was all based on like what I saw. Like everything that I saw in this is like chronologically like when I saw it. So there's like I've seen some really good art since then that's not in here. Yeah.
well, what were these artists? Like what's been really?
Oh, don't put me on the spot.
Okay.
No, let me think about it, and then I'll.
Let's circle back around because that was actually the last question. Okay, so this question is about sex. The book is very sexy.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so.
It's way less sexy than Fantasia. Fantasia's really sexy.
Yeah. Well, in my
thank you.
I'm a little bit So yeah, what is your process writing for sex?
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I
think the sex in this book is like it's very different from the sex in the other book of mine, which is a novella.
And how is it different? Like how is it different writing like sex in a novel versus nonfiction?
Right. Well, because like I don't know, like I'm sitting in front of you talking about this, like you know, like you kind of know who I am. Like if I write about sex in this, like it's very different than if I'm writing a novella, and we can kind of like there's a little bit more like fictional distance, I think. So I think just like mechanically, like I don't think this book is that sexy. I really don't. But because you asked the question, I have to acknowledge it. I mean, I think the thing about writing about sex is it's really about like specificity, and it's about like a kind of emotional clarity. Like, so when I did write Fantasia, it's my novella. It's like out of print now, but if you want to read it, I can send you a PDF. But the brief for that is it's 6 chapters, and each chapter had to have a sex scene in it. And I was like, okay, that's crazy. But what I ended up doing with it was, in each scene, like, it was an opportunity to have the characters evolve somehow, like to show something about their relationship, or to show something about like how they were changing in relation to each other, how they felt about each other. And so each scene became a turning point, and if it didn't have a purpose, then I didn't include it. And I do feel that way about like writing about the body and writing about sex, is that like there should be a reason for it to be in there. And so in this text, I think the moments of like desire or of like embodiment are there hopefully because there was something like really specific about that condition that I wanted to make sure that I was representing accurately. I hope I did it.
I think you did it.
You have to say that though.
Wow, you're really calling me out. Another question I was curious about is how did you arrive at the epistolary voice? Through most of the essays in this book, it's written to a particular you. So it can feel like sometimes you're reading a letter, right? And I'm interested in like what led to that decision.
Yeah. Honestly, so the very first essays that came together in this book are the numbered list ones. So I don't know how many of you have read this book, but they're numbered, and it's kind of like loosely connected fragments. It's like it's giving Maggie Nelson, it's giving Bluets, and those came out in an epistolary way. And I realized I was like writing towards this other who is like, you know, it's based on like a person in my life, but is also like a foil, like is also like, you know, I didn't want, and I can go back and forth on like how this actually turned out, but I didn't want to write a character. I didn't want like the person who is very important to me and like is present in this text to be a character in the text. I felt like that wasn't really fair. So I did another thing which was not quite fair, which was just to write towards this figure. But I felt like that allowed for kind of abstraction in the text, that just made it sort of formally, like, it felt like the right move, because I didn't want to like put words into someone's mouth, as it were. So I felt more like writing towards it.
Yeah, I love that. Writing towards someone rather than writing someone in to the text.
Yeah. And then I do write characters in, like I wrote you in, like you're a named character in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so honored. It was so weird to see my name in it, but really exhilarating at the same time, because I didn't remember all those things. Well, I didn't remember everything we ordered at Hot Pot, but you did, and that was beautiful.
Sure. I was looking at the picture.
You were looking at a picture. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I have a final question, and then maybe we can open it to the audience. So start thinking about all the burning questions you have for Larissa. My last question is just like very generally, like what excites you and what moves you these days? Kind of maybe circling back to the art question, but it doesn't have to be art. It can really be anything.
Yeah. Let's see. I am really excited by painting these days. I've seen some good painting. I'm trying to remember the name of this artist. It's a show at Jeffrey Deitch, I think is how you pronounce it, that like just went down. I will find the name of this artist and I will share it with y'all once I can check Instagram. But she's really young. Oh, Sasha Gordon is the name of the painter. She's really talented. It's really cool. And I've been reading a lot of fiction. I'm getting my own fan fiction right now. And I've been really interested. This is like, I think everyone goes to grad school and is like, haha, I care about form now. But I have become really, I see someone I'm in school with. Hi, Lucy. But I really am really interested in like, well, like what happens if you are telling a story in a particular way. I really love seeing people like pull off like things that are really complicated formally, like telling something from an interesting point of view or like doing something interesting with time. I'm very interested by like Virginia Woolf, like To the Lighthouse. It's like a real lodestone for me. Mixing my metaphors, kind of. Yeah, I think right now form is very compelling to me. Like, you know, I had a conversation with the poet Courtney Bush yesterday, and we were talking. I was talking about actually this book, like, because we were talking about like nonfiction and writing about things that have happened. And I was like, yeah, I find myself very frustrated by language because it doesn't do all the things that I want it to do. Like, I want it to capture all of there is in life, and it can't do that. And she was like, well, yeah, language fundamentally can't do that. She was like, I don't have this problem because I don't ask language to do things that language can't do. And she was like, it's like trying to mop with a tennis ball. Like, you're never going to mop anything up. And I was like, oh my God, okay, like, we're playing tennis. Like, that's like you don't try to make something do that it can't do. And like once we had that conversation, like it just really opened things up for me, because then I was like, oh, I'm actually just like a tennis player. Like I'm not a documentarian. Like I'm not trying to capture something that I can't. So that feels very empowering.
It's great.
That's a good place to open it up.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi.
I'm interested in this distinction, right? That like doing not asking language to do what it can't do, and I wonder where, because you work in these thinking about these three forms of photography, the visual art, and the painting, and your writing. Do you see any overlap in what each of them can and cannot do, or should and should not do, or what you try to make them do?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really bad for like all of the grief that I've given language in my life, because I think I really try to make it do a lot of things that it can't do. And then like, so I'm not a very good painter. And I think like there are limits on like what I can do with paint. And so I don't ask myself to make a painting that I can't make, because I just know that's the limits of like my ability. But that means that I can think about like other things that painting does as a form. And like I think, like photography, for example, like there's such a 1-to-1 ratio with like, I'm sorry, I'm getting really in the weeds. There's such a 1-to-1 ratio with like you take a picture of something, you're like, well, this happened. Like the picture is like proof that something happened, but at the same time, like the picture is the form itself. It's not life, but you think it's life. And I think like language is like that too. Like you could say something that approximates the truth. So you think it's true, but it's not true. But painting is not that. Painting is its own thing, and so that makes it such a beautiful and fluid and expansive language, and I don't ask it to do things that it can't do. And so I think understanding that helps me understand the limits of the other forms. And I think working in multiple forms and being able to appreciate multiple forms helps you understand like what it is that you do when you embark on a project too. Like if I sit down and I'm like, I want to write a short story, that's fundamentally different from like writing a poem, because like those are different forms and they do different things. So that's how I feel about it. Thank you. Hi.
I'm not like totally sure where the question is in this, but I think if I start talking, I'll surface. But I guess I'm thinking also about like having heard you recently read a short poem about how like the second line, I guess I'll paraphrase your 2-line poem. It's about how like when you're happiest you imagine yourself dancing under strobe lights, and I'm wondering also if people talk about how like I don't know how you think about like expression where like any sort of like formulaic generation ends, whether it's like through language or like through visual media, but maybe through like body work or like movement therapy, or cause I don't know, I know you love to dance, and I guess I'm like wondering what it's like for you as someone who is such like a verbal and literary and also like visually expressive person to like put all of that down.
I really feel like this conversation with Courtney, who I don't think is here, but like really cracked things open for me. It's like, I would never make dancing do something that photography does. Right. Like I would never make dancing do anything other than dancing, but like the language for that, like, you know, I think we've all tried to write about dancing, or we've all tried to write about the club, and like I'm really bad at it. Like I don't think anyone's very good at writing about the club, because it's kind of an experience beyond language. It's like writing about like taking shrooms, you know, like just take shrooms, like and that's the experience in of itself. And so yeah, I think like the limits of like body work or like dancing or embodiment are like not really limits. They're just like it's just I don't know how to say it in words, which is my own cross to bear. Yeah, it's just like it's just to appreciate it. You know, you don't make things do what they can't do. Yeah, we're playing tennis. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, two of my friends ask questions. I need a random ask question. Or you have a friend that I don't know yet.
Do you have a favorite book right now?
This is a book that I am hoping to revisit because I read it and it really moved me, and I am excited to see how it moves me again, like with some time in between. But it's this book, Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, and it's really short. It's like a little novella, and it's told from the point of view of a young woman who is with her family, like her father and her mother, and they are reenacting like Bronze Age England, or like Britain, I guess, culture with like a camp of like archaeology students. And so they're all like living together, like wearing like sackcloth and like hunting and like gathering and like doing weird rituals, and it's like very gendered. And then things start like getting weird. Like they start getting really into like the history of like bog people and like human sacrifice, and like things get like really hairy for this girl. And the narration is so amazing. It's first person. There are no quotation marks, so her dialogue and her interior thoughts are like kind of like seamlessly folded in with like the conversations that are happening. And it's very, very good, and it's very short. I have it in my bag. I'm like excited to read it. Yeah.
I have a question.
Oh yeah.
So you talked about To the Lighthouse being like a lodestone, and I remember there's like this thing that happens in the book where, you know, something is like articulated and then it's laid to rest. Or there's this consistently, like this kind of movement happens, and I'm wondering if there's like a parallel to that process for you in your own writing process, i.e. like what does writing expiate or do for you? And has that changed through time? What was that for this book? What is it now?
I'm loving all these like petty questions. I think sometimes we're like, oh yeah, I write for people to feel seen, or like I write for the younger version of me, or I write for, you know, to provide representation of some story or narrative that isn't there yet. And I think those things are usually true, but they're not like really the reason why anyone sits down and writes. Like when you sit down, I think it is like kind of a fundamentally like pretty selfish act in a good way, Like it's like I am writing for my own articulation, I am writing to understand something, I am writing to explore something or answer something. And yeah, so very much so, like I think it is like Lily Briscoe, like sitting down, being like, I am making a painting and I will figure out what is in this painting, and it's a shape, like I'm thinking about these shapes. It's really simple. It's just, there's not really a lot to it. I think like there's much more magic in reading than there is in writing. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like that impulse to answer a question.
I'm also going to be long-winded. So it was so amazing to hear you talk about art, hear you put language to art, and so also I was also really so happy when you mentioned Agnes Martin, and so my head's kind of in a lot of different places. Like one, I'm thinking about like how artists are like acts or like are called to action beyond the context of their own work, or that's like, or outside of being in service to gallery, institution, the market, and then I'm also thinking about yeah, just like the way that like Agnes Martin's work is often presented within the institutional space, and like sort of how sterilized and decontextualized it is from her own life. So I'm curious about sort of these like the complexities of living as an artist who is like polyvalent.
Okay.
Okay,
MFA.
and then, so like wondering if you do you consider yourself an artist? Do you call yourself an artist? And then also what is the responsibility of artists in your mind?
Yeah, ooh. I do consider myself an artist, but then it feels silly to say out loud, but it's in my bio, so like I do feel that way, and I have to put it there, and I do feel like I have a practice of, like a multimedia practice that is largely textual, but like has other elements. And I think it's interesting to hear you, or like it's like nice to hear you say that about Agnes Martin, because I feel like, you know, when you are engaged in cultural production, people are going to make a product of you, and a product of your work, whether or not you want that. And I think to varying degrees, the person who is making something has like some control over it, but like ultimately like not that much. And then like as, you know, time moves on, like you find yourself maybe in places where, you know, the narrative around your work might be different from like you want it to be, and that is challenging. I don't really know how to get around that, well, other than to name that it happens, and I think that absolutely has happened with Agnes Martin in particular, because her work is so palatable in some ways, and it is so, you know, pastoral in a way that it makes it very easy to kind of like boil her down and, you know, make her digestible in a way where she really wasn't as a person. But insofar as I think our responsibility as artists, I think is, I mean, this is like a little twee, but I think like the only thing that I could really say that we ought to do is like is to make work that is often like authentic to ourselves, and to like not sell out the work, because it's like once you stop being truthful in your work, like then your whole integrity as an artist is compromised, which is, you know, then why make things, I guess. So, you know, I think we all have political responsibilities as people in the world, and we all have responsibilities to each other, living in community. But as artists, I think it's really just, you just have to make things that are good, that you believe in. Yeah, which I think a little facile, but. I don't know how we are on time, but.
1 or 2 more questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I'll give you some easy ones. It doesn't have to be that.
What are you listening to, reading, and watching right now?
Oh, I just finished watching Heartstopper, which was so good. It was so cute. It's really good. Every show should be like that. Yeah, I just finished reading, gosh, I'm so basic. I just finished reading Never Let Me Go, which is really, really good. And I last read it in high school, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. And then I read it again, and I was like, okay, this is like incredible. Like what he does with voice, Ishiguro specifically, is just like really, really interesting. Like every book is so different, and like when he writes in first person, like you're just like, oh my gosh, like I'm absorbed into this, like tonally into this character. Like I don't know if you could tell, like if it weren't him, like his name on the cover, like you I don't know, you maybe would know like he wrote all these different books. And what am I listening to? I don't really have a relationship with music right now, which is weird because it's been such a huge part of my life. But I've been listening to like the Charlie XCX album, like on repeat. Like I had a Taylor Swift moment recently. Like I don't know myself. Like I don't know. Yeah. Well, thank you for that.
If there are no more questions, we can call it. One more round of applause.
Your signed copies of Pop Song, which are at the register. Larissa might personalize them. I think we have some copies of Oculus around for them. Thank you so much for coming. Check out our calendar online for more events coming up in July and August, and September and October and beyond. Yeah, have a great night.
Oh, yeah, I heard it was signed.
Oh, that's smart.